Hi, I'm Tamar, and I'm going to present my work on assessing measures of morphological complexity as predictors of learning with neural networks and human learners. And this is part of my PhD at the Center for Language Evolution with Jennifer Culbertson, Hiro Bagliati, and Kenny Smith at the University of Edinburgh. Okay. So when we look at natural languages, we see high variation in the morphological systems. So for example, you can see Vietnamese on the left side on the screen, where nouns are not morphologically marked for cases nor for numbers in most cases. And somewhere on the other side of the scale, we have languages like modern Greek. So you can see that in Greek nominal inflection system, nouns are marked for case and number. And on top of that, nouns are marked according to 8 different noun classes. And theories in language evolution suggested languages are shaped to maximize their learnability. And this is a process that happens when language is passed from person to person, and this includes learning. And under this assumption, this variation that we see in natural languages is very surprising, and especially the inflectional paradigms like in modern Greek, which is very large in noun classes and cases. So trying to understand the variation that we see in natural languages, we can start from a measure for morphological complexity. So how morphological complexity is measured. And there are 2 main approaches. The first one is typological, from the typological literature, that looks at the number of inflectional categories and the number of inflectional classes. So basically the size of the paradigm. And the second one looks at the implicative structure of the paradigm. So looking at the internal organization of the paradigm, and I will say more about that in a few slides. So Ackerman and Maloof, in a paper from 2013, distinguished these 2 approaches. They referred to the first one, the typological literature, the enumerative complexity, or E-complexity in short, and to the second one, integrative complexity, or I-complexity in short. And they suggested measure for I-complexity from information theory. So just the notion, what's the notion behind I-complexity? It reflects the extent to which inflections in the paradigm predict each other. So for example, we have here the Greek nominal inflection. So if we want to mark a noun in plural nominative, then we have at least 4 different ways to do that. So that's a bit of a problem, or we have lots of options here. But say that we already know the singular nominative, the suffix that the noun takes in singular nominative, and say that it takes OS as a suffix, then it really reduces the uncertainty for which a marker or suffix the noun should take in plural nominative. And that's the I-complexity, the predictability between forms in the paradigm. And it is measured as the conditional entropy of the inflections in the paradigm. And E-complexity could also be measured with notions from information theory, and it would reflect the number of forms in the paradigm, or the distribution of forms in each categorical, in each grammatical category. And this will be measured as the entropy of the forms in the paradigm. So Ackerman and Maloof in their paper showed that across a set of 10 languages, E-complexity varies quite widely, but I-complexity is consistently low across these languages. And they suggest that languages are implicitly designed to minimize their I-complexity, especially when their E-complexity is high. And after Balthazar Bickel's talk and Eitan's talk, we already know that the picture that we see now in the languages in the world, it does not have to reflect the mechanism behind it. So the question in my work is whether I-complexity reflects the learnability of morphological paradigms, so the mechanism that will lead to this result that Ackerman and Maloof found. Because if so, this would explain the variation that we see in natural languages. So there is already some evidence from previous studies for the effect of I complexity, specifically on generalizing paradigms to novel stems with human learners. And Seyfarth et al. From 2014 trained participants on an artificial language where nouns were marked for 3 numbers, singular, dual, and plural, with suffixes, and according to one of 3 noun classes. And the singular form, in their paradigms, their singular form predicted the dual form, but not the plural. The plural weren't predictive of the dual forms. And they trained participants on forms in the language from the entire paradigm, and then they tested the participants on the novel items. And in the predictive trials, they had 2 types of trials. In the predictive trials, they showed them the form in singular and asked them to produce the form in dual. And the unpredictive trials, they showed them the form in plural and asked them to produce the dual for the same object. And they showed that participants did better in producing the correct dual form for the novel stems in the predictive trials. And in my work, I'm training both LSTMs and human learners on artificial languages to test whether I complexity predict learning morphological paradigms beyond generalizing them to novel items. And I'm also testing how well I complexity predicts learning when comparing it to other measures of morphological complexity as the E complexity. So just a few words on neural networks and in relation to language processing tasks. So neural networks are a type of computational model whose goal is to estimate the correct function between the input and the output of the model. So using a data set of input-output pairs, in each iteration of the model tries to approximate the function so that for any given input, it would be able to produce the correct output. And then we have recurrent neural networks, which is a model that is more suitable for linguistic tasks because it's sensitive to the context in which the input appeared in. And then finally, we have a long short-term memory, or LSTMs in short, which is the model that I'm using here. And that's an improvement of RNNs. And it was found to capture human-like behavior in linguistic tasks. So here in my work, I'm using LSTMs as subjects, comparing them to the human learners. So I'm testing human learners and LSTMs on a matched task of morphological learning for systematic comparison. I must say that LSTMs are convenient learners. They show low variation when trained on the same data, when the same run or runs of the same model show low variation as opposed to human learners, and they can be tested on large data sets. And there's now a growing body of work studying RNNs as models of human language learning. And the motivation for that is that we could learn more on human language learning from studying the networks. So this work explores mostly syntactic structure representation, and my work here adds to this line of literature in comparing LSTMs to human learners in morphological learning. So the artificial language that I used in these experiments is of the same design as at Seyfarth et al. Forms were marked for singular, dual, and plural according to their noun class, and there were 3 noun classes in the paradigm, and the number was marked as a suffix. So I also manipulated the I complexity to test how it affects the learnability of the paradigm. So we had 2 types of paradigms, one with low I complexity and the other with high I complexity. And the main difference here is that in the low I complexity paradigm, the singular form predicts the dual form. And in the high I complexity, it is not the case. So forms that take AT as a suffix in singular wouldn't necessarily take OC in dual. And for the human learners, which were participants online in Mechanical Turk, stems in the language were coupled with objects, and learning the language was done by trial and error. So on each trial, the picture of the object or the objects was presented on the screen together with a set of possible stem suffix labels. And then participants were asked to choose the correct label and received feedback on their answer. And for the LSTMs, the models received as input a string of the stem and the grammatical number. So for example, SOV2 would be the stem SOV in dual. And then their task was to produce the output, the correct inflection or the correct suffix for this form. And for both RNNs and human learners, we trained them on the language with a stage learning design. So in block 1, they were exposed only to the forms in singular from the entire language. And in block 2, they were exposed to singular and plural forms. And only in block 3, they were exposed to all forms, including the dual forms. And this design was, we used this design to increase the likelihood of learners to exploit the predictive relationships in the paradigm. So given that they already know very well the forms in singular, would they use it when coming to learn the dual forms? And the critical measure of learning was accuracy on the dual forms. So here you can see results from study 1 with the human learners. So in the first study that we ran, we did not find an effect of I complexity on learning the forms in the paradigm. Note that the critical trials were the trials in dual. So we didn't see a difference between the participants trained on the high I complexity paradigms and the low I complexity paradigms in learning the dual forms. And then for study 2, we added a 4th block, identical to block 3. And we also designed block 3 and 4 so that the dual tries followed either a trial in singular or in plural of the same object. Okay, so to make the link between the form in a singular and dual more apparent. But then also in study 2, we didn't find a significant difference or a significant effect of I complexity. We did see a difference between the participants in the high I complexity versus the low I complexity paradigms, but this was explained by the general learning abilities of participants rather than by the I complexity. And only in the 3rd study, we did see an effect of I complexity when the design here was identical to the design in study 2, but we ran it with more participants, 50 participants in each condition, rather than 30 in the previous experiments. And these are the results from the LSTMs. So with the neural networks, we do see a clear effect of I complexity. You can see here the neural networks trained on low I complexity paradigms in blue, and their performance was higher than networks trained on the high I complexity paradigms. And the same trend is seen in the size, the picture here that you see on the left, the enlarged picture with one size of the network, but we also ran different sizes of networks and saw the same pattern. So just to summarize up to here, in human learners, there is only weak evidence of I complexity to be a factor in learning, but in LSTMs, there's a clear effect of this measure on learning. And then to assess the effect of I complexity and test whether it is a meaningful factor in shaping morphological paradigm, it was worth comparing it against other measures of morphological complexity and their effect on paradigms learnability, such as the E complexity measure that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. So we trained both LSTMs and humans on another type of language with higher E complexity, and then we compared their performance to the previous results. So till here, I had two types of paradigms with low I complexity, and high I complexity, sorry. And now I designed a new paradigm with matched low I complexity, but high E complexity. So the way I did that was by introducing another form to mark the dual. And this paradigm had high E complexity, but a low I complexity. And then I compared the performance of the LSTMs and human learners to the previous results that I've got. So these are the results from the human learners. You can see in green the results from participants trained on the high E complexity paradigms. And you can see that they did worse than participants trained on the high I complexity paradigm. So it suggests that the E complexity affects learning more than the I complexity. And also in the LSTMs, we see the same trend. In green, again, you see the network trained on the high E complexity, and they also performed worse in learning the dual forms in the paradigm. And this trend was also found in all sizes of the networks that we used. So to summarize, we find that in RNNs, both I and E complexity have an effect on learning with larger effect of E complexity. And human learners show similar results with a weak effect of I complexity and a clear evidence that low E complexity is beneficial for learning. And our conclusions from that is that we see both in RNNs and in humans that E complexity shows a greater effect on learning. So that suggests that the distribution of forms in the paradigm and their frequency affect the learnability of the paradigm more than the form's internal organization in the paradigm, as reflected by the I complexity. And it is still a possibility that the weak effect that we saw in I complexity has still a role in shaping languages, maybe through generalization or learning paradigms, but that will have to be only a secondary role rather than a main role in shaping languages. And also, overall, we see that human learners and LSTMs that were used here show similar patterns in the factors that affecting their learning in morphological learning tasks. And I find it interesting that, and our future work is going to look more into how LSTMs learn morphological paradigms to try and learn more on human learners in tasks where we see similarity in their performances. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamar. And you can ask questions in the Q&A or raise your virtual hands or your actual hands, but I don't promise I'll actually notice that. While people are collecting their thoughts, I'll use my privilege as chair to ask you a question, because the people who you were, the human people, they were native speakers of English?
Yeah, they self-reported as native speakers of English. Yeah.
Because I'm curious, why did you use a morphological category that doesn't exist in English, which I think makes the task harder? Like, was that on purpose, or you just needed 3 different categories? Because I'm wondering for an English speaker that even makes sense that there would be a dual, right? It's not just that the form is weird.
Okay, yeah. We had that concern. Yeah, I did need 3 categories, 3 numbers to run these experiments. And we did have the concern that you just raised. But then we tested in the data from the participants, and we saw that they did learn the dual and the fact that the dual is different than the plural very early in the experiment. So that really made our concern disappear very early in the process. Thank you.
Are there any other questions in the Q&A? I don't see, no. Yes, Dorit?
Well, I have a question regarding the ecological validity of these experiments. To what extent do you think they can teach us about the actual process of learning a natural language?
In what aspect do you mean? Do you mean like the size of the language, or?
No, I mean the natural circumstances under which a language is learned, which consist of much more than a structure or semantics, but rather as a whole communicative context in the deepest sense of the word. So, and what is it that these learners are basing themselves on, and what does it mean? I know it's a very big question, but you are the one who is the expert. That's why I'm asking.
Okay, so there is a large body of work that use artificial language learning to test learnability of aspects in language. And this is also why I'm using here, or part of the reason why I'm also using here LSTMs, because it's not testing one model of learning, but I'm testing more models of learning for the same question. So to kind of raise the ecological validity of this the goal of our experiment. But yeah, it's an open question, I guess, with a lot of debate whether about the ecological validity of artificial language learning tasks. I agree.
Thank you.
We have time for one more quick question. Vinicius?
Hi, thank you very much for this talk.
Hey.
I actually had a similar question to both previous questions, and that was, whenever we see, language models, neural networks, learning better than the humans, or, like a rational model that predicts behavior that is actually better than the humans, I think that's actually a very interesting scenario, because then the humans are never wrong, right? So then the question is, what is it that the models are picking up on that the humans are not, right?
Exactly,
and what can we learn from this? What is it that is missing, right, in the human reasoning, which is the one that we have to model ultimately, right? So what do you think that is going on in the particular case here of duals, right?
Of the predictability in the paradigm. So this is exactly like the future work that I'm going to, that I intend to do, and looking more into the under the hood of the neural networks, and try to understand what is the mechanism behind it that makes them use the low I complexity more easily than in human participants, and then to try from that to also learn on the human learners and their mechanisms.
And sorry, maybe just a short clarification question. So you said that so the English natives who do not have dual, right, in the native language, they were able to pick up this quite quickly, right? What would you predict? What would happen to natives of a language that does have dual, right? Do you think this is just a ceiling effect? Would they just pick it up even more quickly, or would it actually reflect later on during usage, right? Or
even what they picked up quickly was the fact that there was a dual and that it was different from the plural form.
Okay.
Even if you know that from the beginning, you still have to learn the forms, and that will also take time. But also, if that would affect their ability to use the low I complexity of the paradigm. but maybe I don't see how, but yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.